has huge problems of supply, getting compressors, getting tanks, all of this kind of thing.
Yes.
You just can't do it. And as soon as you start to do it, it's referred back to the government, and they say, well, why do you want to dive? And they quite strictly control their waters. So it took a very long time to just get permission to dive there. And then because there are no logistics and no facilities, it was necessary for India's National Institute of Oceanography to go there also, to bring in a portable compressor so that we could have air in our tanks.
I wonder what they're afraid of, though. I mean, do they?
I don't think they're afraid of anything. I just think that in other places, for example, the Caribbean, where everybody dives all the time.
Yeah.
The idea of a diver has become normalized, and people are quite used to seeing folk dressed up in masks and fins and so on. But in India, the idea of a diver is not normalized, and the immediate suspicion is, why is this person diving? Is he going to try to steal something from us? Is it some kind of security issue? This was particularly large in the Gulf of Cambay in the northwest, which is near the troubled areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan.
So I guess in every country there's a Zahi waiting somewhere, huh?
Well, yes. In the case of India, it's just rather charming, and Zahi Hawass, yes, from Egypt. It's just rather charming and slow-moving. It's a sort of worst of British bureaucracy, tinged with sort of 50 years of the worst of Indian bureaucracy as well, and everything just takes a long time to happen. But in a very nice, polite way, and as long as you're patient, and there's no reason not to be patient with India because it's one of the oldest countries in the world. As long as you're patient, you will eventually get to do what you want to do, and that I did. Dived on this structure, filmed it, and we are returning there in a month's time with a full-scale expedition, again jointly with the National Institute of Oceanography, but with a lot of technical divers from Britain, in order to survey the other 27 structures that have been found nearby.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, what's intriguing about this structure in southeast India is the depth of submergence on that coast. We have to remember that I mentioned this earlier, but there is an increasingly highly developed science which takes into account all the variables that you need to take into account to figure out what the sea level was on any particular location, anywhere in the world, at any particular time. And when that program is run on this site, we find that the underwater structure that I've dived on there was submerged 11,500 years ago.
11,500 years.
That, by the way, is the same date that's given in Plato for the submergence of Atlantis in another ocean.
Well, one of the major things I think that will come crashing home to people as they realize these areas that were above ground 11,000 or 11,500 years ago or whatever, even millions of years ago at 2,200 feet or whatever. I mean, if it happened once, Graham, it could happen again.
I think that's one of the most humbling lessons of this new material, which is now coming out all around the world, is that it is really possible that our ancestors reached a much higher level of development than we imagined. Perhaps they formed a different kind of civilization to the one we've created, but if they lived in cities, they were certainly a highly developed people. That this could have happened and then been forgotten.
Is it possible that along with an older civilization that went much, much farther than we imagine, there would have been a technology of some description that we don't fully understand today, perhaps a technology that was able to do things that we almost can't do today, like build pyramids, I don't know, whatever, they developed some sort of probably what we would call magic today. Yeah. Although I'm sure it's natural to do all of this.
It's a harnessing of natural forces. Well, of course, we're entering a highly speculative area here.
Yes,
Speculation is fun. So let's speculate. Once we cross the barrier and accept that it appears that there was a whole earlier layer of civilization, which we are only just beginning to find out about, and that had reached the level of an urban civilization, then it would be very surprising if there wasn't some kind of technology involved. Simply to get an organized, complex culture that can build cities involves so many processes that it would be almost a miracle if there wasn't a technology involved. But at the same time, the evidence for this remains to be confirmed and remains to be established as to whether that's so or not. I like to think, from studying ancient texts, and in this case particularly relevant are the ancient texts of India, that we may be looking at a society which in some ways was very different from ours. If they developed technology, it would have been of a different sort. The primary interest of that society was not particularly technological or material. Mm-hmm. You can even see this in India today, that millions of people in India spend their entire lives just wandering as pilgrims from place to place, having completely renounced the world because they believe that attachment to the world slows down the progress of the soul. So we can't assume that an earlier society, an earlier civilization was as interested in technology as we are.
And perhaps not at all in the sense that we are. It may have been a very, in other words, it could have been a civilization that was based on certain beliefs, yes, based on certain facts that we no longer understand. Correct?
I think that's exactly the way to look at it. That it raises two questions: not only the possibility that great civilizations can be destroyed and lost for thousands of years, almost without trace, but also that the pattern in which a civilization evolves is not necessarily fixed in the model that we have today. Perhaps there are other ways for this to happen. Perhaps our kind of global dominant society today is only one of many routes that human beings could take, and then perhaps not even necessarily the best.
Well, sure. Isn't it rather egotistical to imagine this is the only way?
Yeah.
With regard to the first site you were talking about, Mike in Anaheim, California asks, I hear the currents are too strong for diving on the site. How might people eventually explore the site and do so in a way which does not involve dredging for artifacts?
Right. A good question, and a good point raised in it, because dredging for artifacts is, it was necessary in this case because it was necessary to establish once and for all that these were man-made sites.
Yeah, but then you got to take the next step, right?
You got to take the next step, and dredging won't do it. Now, when I first got on to this story, which is close to a year ago now, that was when I put in my applications to dive with the National Institute of Ocean Technology, who found these structures in the Gulf of Cambay. When we went back there to film with them, which we did in just a month or two ago in December, we still did not have permission to dive in the Gulf of Cambay, and they themselves had not dived in the Gulf of Cambay. And the reason for this is these enormous currents. There's actually a 30-foot difference between high tide and low tide in the Gulf of Cambay.
Wow.
And the site is more than 20 miles from shore. Now, the most dangerous thing for any diver, forget about sharks, forget about anything like that, the most dangerous thing is to get carried away by a current. Mm-hmm. If you are carried off by a current and you surface half a mile from your boat, unless they have a fast recovery vessel, a launch, which can go out and pick you up, and it often can't see you if there's waves even 3 feet high.
Then you're dead.
You're dead, and there's no shore to swim to. So this is a deep site. It's 120 feet deep in places. It involves a lot of logistics and backup for diving, and for just securing that people don't die there. We're still hoping...
It's actually almost like drifting away from a spacecraft without a tether, isn't it?
It is. It is like drifting away from a spacecraft without a tether, and I've done it several times. And the two occasions when I've come closest to losing my life as a diver have both been because of that, of surfacing and literally not seeing the boat that you jumped off. It's gone.
God, that's got to be scary.
It is a very scary thing, and it's a scary thing when you're less than a mile from shore and have some chance to swim to shore, but it's an impossibly scary thing when you're 20 miles from shore, as is the case in the Gulf of Cambay. So very careful steps have to be taken to ensure that diving is safe there, but it can be done, and we're hoping to dive on that site with a bit of luck within the next 6 months.
Well, you're certainly to be commended for not only talking and researching, as so many academics do, but going out there and looking for yourself. Now, you saw this with your own eyes. Is there any question at all about what you saw?
No. As far as I'm concerned, I've seen a lot more evidence on this than has so far been made public. And by the way, the story of the Indian underwater cities is hardly